The millionaire who terrorized the company was silenced by the new secretary, and the reason is unbelievable. Before we start, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Excuse me, murmured Riley, weaving around employees walking like sleepy turtles. First day on the job and I'm already late. In her hand she balanced a tray with 2 coffees, one for her, the other to try to impress the boss she hadn't even met yet, Maxwell Crawford, the man who, according to rumors, had the charm of Squidward and the sweetness of a lime. She passed the reception desk, trying to smile at the young woman at the counter, but her left heel slipped on the shiny floor. The tray jumped, and in her reflex to catch it, she lost her balance even more. And as if it were fate or divine punishment, right in front of her appeared a tall man, perfectly tailored suit, serious expression, walking as if even gravity bowed to him. Maxwell Crawford. The 2 coffee cups flew, tracing a perfect arc in the air before landing squarely on his chest and tie. The hot liquid spread, leaving a brown stain on a suit that probably cost more than $1,000. The murmur in the reception area stopped. Even the security guard scrolling through his phone looked up as if expecting a scene. Riley froze, breathing quickly, her eyes moving from the stain on his suit to his face. Maxwell lowered his gaze to his chest and then slowly looked back at her. The silence between them felt heavier than the soaked fabric. Then, in a moment that could only be called professional suicide, she blurted out, "At least it matches your suit. It's premium latte, so don't worry." A collective gasp swept through the lobby. Maxwell frowned, his jaw tense. Didn't seem like a man used to hearing sarcasm, much less accepting it. "You," he began, his voice low, firm, and filled with irritation. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Riley swallowed hard. "I spilled coffee on your suit, but technically I increased its value. Premium coffee, you know." She forced a nervous smile. Maxwell blinked slowly, as if trying to decide if she was a bold employee or someone completely out of her mind. "This is a custom-made suit from Italy. It costs more than your annual salary." She bit her lip. "Look on the bright side. Now you're nicely scented." A ripple of shock moved through the employees. Someone in the back muttered a muffled, "Oh my God." Maxwell took a step forward and Riley realized he was even more intimidating up close. The smell of coffee mixed with his expensive cologne was almost an olfactory declaration of war. "Your name?" he ordered. "Riley Parker. Your new secretary." He raised his. "Perfect. First day and you're already on my list of urgent matters." Riley tried to explain. "I was just trying to be nice, bringing you coffee, and for me too, because, well, mornings," she gestured, realizing she was waving a coffee-stained hand. "Kale, stop." Maxwell took a deep breath, clearly fighting for patience. "Go to my office in 10 minutes and bring." He looked at the tray on the floor, a cloth. G blinked, unsure if he was serious or if this was some cruel test. "Right, boss." When he walked away, the murmuring began again. 2 interns started whispering excitedly, and the receptionist said, with a mischievous smile, "10 minutes in and you've already made history." Riley sighed. "Yeah, welcome to the dream job, Parker." The elevator seemed to climb slower than any in engineering history. At each floor, Riley replayed the coffee splash in her head, imagining the possible consequences. Public humiliation, immediate firing, becoming a hallway legend, the girl who ruined the boss's suit. When she finally reached the 27th floor, the hallway felt like a silent courtroom. The door to Maxwell's office was open, but his figure, standing with his back to her, looking out the window, made her hesitate. "Come in," he said without turning around. She took 2 steps, holding the cloth like a shield. "I am sorry about the coffee. It was an accident. I really wanted to make a good impression." He turned slowly. The stain on his suit was still there, but his look wasn't just anger. It was something you make with work, not with. He glanced at his chest. "Latte." She nodded. "I understand. So I guess I shouldn't bring donuts tomorrow." Maxwell didn't respond. He simply walked over to the desk, picked up a folder, and set it down in front of her. Work for today. Let's see if you're better at typing than serving coffee. Riley took the folder, keeping her chin up. I'm great at typing and at serving coffee too when the floor isn't conspiring against me. For a second she could have sworn. She saw the corner of his mouth threaten to smile, but it was gone just as quickly. You can go. And, Parker, he called out as she was already at the door. Don't spill anything else on me. All right, she replied before leaving. As she closed the door, Riley knew two things. First, she wasn't going to make things easy for that man. Second, he wasn't going to make things easy for her either. Riley arrived on the second day determined to prove that the coffee incident had been nothing more than a rough start. Little did she know that Maxwell Crawford had spent the entire night crafting a strategy any war general would be proud of. At 8:15 sharp, the phone on her desk rang. Parker, my office now. His voice came over the intercom with the chill of an iceberg. She sighed, straightened her blouse, and walked down the hall, noticing the way employees watched her with a mix of curiosity and pity. It was as if they were watching someone walk to their own funeral. Sit, Maxwell ordered without looking up from a document that seemed more important than world peace. Riley sat down, hands folded in her lap, waiting for the verdict. I have a few tasks for you, he began, finally lifting his gaze with a smile that never reached his eyes. First, I need you to organize all the financial department's files alphabetically, then by date, then by relevance. Deadline noon. Riley blinked. Mr. Crawford, there are over 1,000 documents. Your problem. He cut in, pretending to read again. Oh, and I need a detailed report on the third floor employees' productivity for today as well. Today 5 o'clock. And I need he paused dramatically, clearly savoring the moment. One silver paper clip. Just one. Riley frowned. A silver paper clip. Exactly. Not gold, not white, not chrome. Silver for an extremely important presentation. She stayed silent for a few seconds, processing. May I ask what for? No, you may go. Riley left his office with an expression somewhere between disbelief and determination. In the elevator, she muttered to herself, "You want war, you'll get war." 2 hours later, Maxwell was arriving at his office when he heard a strange noise coming from inside. Something metallic, like someone pouring coins. Curious, he quickly opened the door. Riley stood in front of his desk, smiling like a cat that had just discovered where the fish was hidden. Maxwell's desk was completely covered in silver paper clips, thousands of them scattered like shiny confetti. I brought all I could find. You can pick the best one, she said as casually as if she'd brought him a cup of coffee. No need to thank me. Maxwell froze in the doorway, speechless. In the middle of the desk, among the paper clips, was a handwritten note. Hope one of these works for your extremely important presentation. Parker, what is this? The silver paperclip you asked for? She replied, keeping her sarcastic smile. A few employees began to gather discreetly in front of the glass wall, whispering excitedly. Maxwell looked at the desk, then at Riley, then back at the desk. Something between irritation and disbelief crossed his face. How did you get so many silver paper clips? I borrowed them from a few offices in the building. Everyone was more than happy to help when they heard it was for Maxwell Crawford and the productivity report. Riley pulled a folder from under her arm and set it down on the only uncluttered corner of the desk. Done with colorful charts and everything. Turns out the third floor is 23% more productive when they have access to good coffee and background music. Interesting find. Maxwell flipped through the folder quickly and to his own surprise found it impeccably organized and detailed. And the financial files sorted alphabetically, chronologically, and by relevance. It was too easy, so I also added categories by cover color and by document thickness. You never know when that might come in handy. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of paper clips sliding off the desk when Maxwell tried to lean on it. You did all this in one morning. And still had time for lunch, she said, checking her watch. By the way, I brought sandwiches for the team. They're in the kitchen in case anyone's interested. An excited murmur spread among the curious employees. Maxwell took a deep breath clearly. 3. Recalculating his strategy. Tomorrow I want my desk clean and coffee. Regular. Coffee. Of course, boss. When Riley left, Maxwell was alone with his 10,000 silver paper clips. Were completely out of his control. The next morning, Maxwell walked into the office expecting to find a spotless desk and a steaming cup of coffee waiting for him. Instead, he found a tray of donuts arranged like a piece of art. They weren't ordinary donuts. The icing on each one formed a letter, and together they spelled out a message. Leaders inspire, bosses sour. Maxwell stood there staring at the sugary masterpiece. When Riley appeared at the door, "Good morning. I thought you could use a little sugar to sweeten your mood, Parker. The donuts are from a French bakery gourmet. I figured they'd suit your refined taste." Maxwell picked up one of the donuts, noting the perfection of the icing. "You decorated these?" Spent 2 hours at the bakery teaching the baker. He said he'd never made donuts with motivational messages before. Motivational. It's a modern leadership technique. Inspirational. Sweets. I read about it in an article from the Harvard Business Review. Maxwell took a bite, and even though he tried to keep a straight face, he had to admit it was delicious. "And the coffee? Oh, I thought you were doing a caffeine detox. I read somewhere that executives are adopting healthier habits." She left the room, leaving Maxwell annoyed, alone with his philosophical donuts and his decaf coffee. Downstairs, at reception, things were unusually lively. Employees were gathered in small groups, whispering excitedly. James, the security guard, had set up a betting board where people could guess the exact day Riley would be fired. "I'm betting on Friday," said Sandra from it. "No one can last 5 days making Crawford 11:32 look like a fool." "I don't know," murmured Ton from marketing. "She seems to be having fun, and honestly so does he." "What do you mean? You didn't notice? Yesterday he laughed when she walked out with the paper clips. I saw it through the glass." "Maxwell Crawford doesn't laugh." Sandra shook her head. "The best. He smiles when he's firing someone." James, watching from his post, added another bet to the board. "Monday, Sandra." From it. But what no one noticed was Maxwell standing upstairs watching the scene through the security cameras. And what absolutely no one saw was the genuine smile he hid behind his hand as he bit into his second donut of the morning. The war had officially begun, and for the first time in years Maxwell Crawford was having fun at work. Later, the boardroom on the 30th floor of Crawford Enterprises had never felt so tense. 5 major investors, the kind who decide a company's fate over breakfast, were seated around the mahogany table, while Maxwell adjusted his tie for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. His suit was flawless as always. Every crease was sharp, every button polished to perfection. The "I know everything" aura he had cultivated over the years was firmly in place, like an invisible suit of armor. "Gentlemen," Maxwell began, clicking the remote to start the presentation. "Last quarter's numbers show a 15% growth across all strategic areas." Thomas Hartwell, a gay-haired investor with gold-rimmed glasses, flipped through some papers with a focused expression. Next to him, Markerchan took notes on a tablet while the other 3 men studied the screen with professional attention. "Impressive," Crawford Hartwell said. "These results exceed our initial projections." Maxwell smiled, the kind of smile he reserved for guaranteed victories. "Efficiency is our trademark. Every team member is carefully chosen to maximize productivity." At that moment, the door opened and Riley walked in carrying a tray of coffee and wearing an apologetic expression. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, placing cups in front of each investor with the grace of someone who had practiced the motion 1,000 times. Maxwell watched her out of the corner of his eye, irritation rising in his throat. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not during a meeting this important. "This is our new secretary," he said in a tone that managed to be both an introduction and a dismissal. She's still adapting to our questionable efficiency standards. Riley paused mid-motion while handing coffee to Margaret Chen. For a moment, the silence in the room was heavier than the air before a storm. Questionable, she repeated with a smile that looked far too innocent to be genuine. Nothing personal, Parker. Just an observation about the adjustment process. The investors exchanged discreet glances. Hartwell raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the dynamic unfolding before him. Riley finished serving the coffee, and instead of slipping out quietly as Maxwell expected, she walked over to the presentation screen. "May I make an observation about these numbers, Mr. Crawford?" Maxwell felt a chill in his stomach. "Parker, this isn't appropriate. It's just that," she continued, pointing to a chart on the screen. "This says we had 15% growth. But if we consider the data I received from the finance department yesterday, the correct number would be 12%. The silence 15:04 in the room shifted. It was no longer one of expectation. It was surprise. Maxwell looked at the screen, then at Riley, then at the investors who were now giving their full attention to the young secretary of questionable efficiency. "Are you sure about that?" asked Margaret Chen with genuine curiosity. Riley pulled a folder she had quietly placed on a nearby chair. "I have the original reports right here. The mistake is in the sum of the third quarter figures. Someone rounded up a few decimals that, when added together, inflated the final result." She opened the folder and, to Maxwell's growing horror, began showing an impromptu presentation complete with colorful charts and neatly organized tables that made his numbers look amateurish. "See," she said, pointing to a hand-drawn chart that was impressively detailed. "If we separate the results by department and adjust the margins of error, the actual growth is 12.3%. Still an excellent result, but more realistic." Hartwell leaned forward, studying the papers Riley had spread out on the table. "Are these calculations correct?" "I can guarantee they are. I spent 3 hours. Maxwell felt as if the floor were shifting under his feet. Not only had Riley publicly corrected his numbers, but she had done it with an elegance that made the situation even more humiliating. "Interesting. Rumor James Morrison, another investor. How many years of experience do you have in financial analysis, Miss Parker?" "Riley Parker. And honestly, none. My degree is in communications, but numbers don't lie, no matter who's reading them." That's when it happened. Hartwell began to laugh. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh that echoed through the conference room like thunder. "My goodness," he said, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "This girl is worth more than any stock in your company, Crawford." The other investor smiled, clearly entertained. Margaret Chen flipped through Riley's charts with obvious approval. Maxwell was torn between wanting to hide under the table and pulling Riley over for a toast. His irritation was real, but there was something else, something he refused to acknowledge as admiration. "Well," he said, trying to regain control of the situation, "I apologize for the unplanned interruption." "Interruption?" Hartwell shook his head. "That was clarification. I'd take honest numbers over colorful fantasies any day." Riley began gathering her papers. "I'll let you continue your meeting in peace. I just wanted to be sure everyone had the correct information." "Wait," said Margaret Chen. "You made these charts yourself?" "Yes, I used basic Excel and a little creativity with the colors." "How long did it take you?" Riley thought for a moment. "About 2 hours last night after work." Morrison nodded, impressed. "Crawford, you might have found a diamond in the rough." Maxwell watched Riley head to the door, and for a moment their eyes met. There was challenge in hers, but also something like a silent question. "Do you still think my efficiency is questionable?" "Thank you for the correction, Parker," he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "Always at your service, boss." When the door closed behind her, Hartwell turned to Maxwell with a mischievous smile. 15 years investing in companies, and I've never seen a secretary correct the CEO in public with that much class. Either you promote her or I'll hire her." Maxwell forced the laugh. She's still in her trial period. If I were you, I'd make it permanent before she realizes her own worth. The rest of the meeting went on without incident, but Maxwell could hardly focus. His mind was busy processing what had just happened. Riley hadn't just challenged him in public. She'd done it with skill, intelligence, and a confidence bordering on boldness. When the investors finally left, Maxwell stayed alone in the room. Looking at the charts Riley had forgotten on the table. They weren't just accurate, they were brilliant. For the first time in years, someone had completely thrown him off balance. And the most unsettling part was that he no longer knew if he wanted revenge or to find out what other surprises Riley Parker had up her sleeve. 3 days had passed since the incident in the conference room, and Riley was starting to notice things she hadn't paid attention to before. Yes, employees laughed more when she was around, but there was something in their eyes, a shadow that lingered even in lighter moments. It was Thursday, almost 7 o'clock in the evening, when she decided to stay late to finish some reports. The building was nearly empty, with only the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of a vacuum breaking the silence. Maria from the cleaning crew was pushing her cart down the hall when Riley greeted her. "Hi, Maria. Working late tonight?" The woman, who looked to be in her 50s, smiled, but Riley noticed the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I always work late, dear. Ever since they cut our team, each of us has to cover 2 floors. Riley stopped typing. "They cut the team?" Maria glanced around as if afraid the walls might be listening. 6 months ago, Mr. Crawford said it was to optimize costs. They also cut our health plan. Now we only have the basics. The health plan used to be good. Cover dental, glasses, those kinds of things. Now she shrugged, resigned. We make do. Riley felt a tightness in her chest. And the other employees? Were there cuts for them too? Maria lowered her voice even more. The 3rd floor lost their food allowance. The IT team doesn't get transportation vouchers anymore, and there's no more snacks in the kitchen after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Why? Cost cutting. Or so they say. Riley stayed quiet, processing the information. While Maxwell probably spent more on one suit than Maria earned in 2 months, employee. We're losing basic benefits. Maria, can I ask you something? Why don't you all complain? The woman laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Complain to who, dear? Mr. Crawford isn't exactly known for taking suggestions, and jobs aren't easy to come by right now. We put up with it. That night, Riley went home with a knot in her stomach. She had thought Maxwell was just an arrogant, difficult boss. But finding out he was cutting benefits from people barely getting by, while he strutted around in Italian suits, changed everything. The next morning, Riley arrived at work 2 hours early. She had a mission. By 8 o'clock, when the first employee started arriving, they found an unusual scene in the office kitchen. Riley was there, wearing an improvised apron made out of paper towels, handing out fresh pastries and real coffee, not the brownish liquid the machine usually produced. "Morning, Sandra." She greeted the IT woman, offering a still warm pastry. "Special breakfast today." Sandra took the pastry, looking suspicious. "What's this?" "Operation Smile," Riley said with a wink. "Today everyone eats well." Each pastry came with a note attached. Sandra opened hers and read it out loud. "Stay strong. Today you don't have to pretend you like him." She burst out laughing. "Riley, you're crazy." Within minutes, the kitchen was full of employees, all laughing at their notes. Tom from marketing laughed so hard at his that he nearly choked on his coffee. "Remember, he may be your boss, but you're the one who really keeps this company running." He read aloud. "Where did you get these pastries?" "I have my contacts," Riley replied mysteriously. In truth, she had gotten up at 5 in the morning to go to her neighborhood bakery and convince the owner to take a special order. James, from accounting, held his note like it was treasure. "Today's a good day to ask for a raise, or at least to add extra sugar to your coffee." He shook his head, impressed. "You really did this for everyone. You deserve it," Riley said simply. "You work hard and keep this place running." It's the least I can do. Maria appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her cleaning uniform, and Riley immediately offered her 2 pastries. "One for you and one for Sansi," she said, referring to Maria's coworker. When Maria read her note, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for keeping our workplace clean and welcoming. You are seen and appreciated," Maria whispered. "Hey, no crying in the kitchen," Riley said, giving the woman a quick hug. House room. The buzz in the kitchen grew. Employees from other floors began showing up, drawn by the smell of real food and the sound of laughter. In minutes, what was supposed to be a simple breakfast had turned into a small impromptu party. That's when Maxwell appeared. He stopped at the kitchen doorway, watching the scene with an expression that mixed confusion and suspicion. Lively conversations, genuine smiles, employees who usually barely said hello sharing tables and jokes. "What's going on here?" His voice cut through the chatter like a cold blade. The silence was instant, as if someone had pressed the mute button in real life. Riley turned, still holding a tray of pastries, and smiled as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. "Good morning, Mr. Crawford. Want a pastry? They're ham and cheese." Maxwell looked at the tray, then at the employees' faces, which now looked like kids caught doing something they shouldn't. "Parker, my office now." "Of course," she replied, setting the tray on the counter. "Enjoy, everyone. There's plenty more." She started walking toward the door, but Maxwell intercepted her in the hallway. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" "Breakfast," she said, as if the answer was obvious. "This isn't breakfast. This is caring about employees. Recognition, basic humanity." Maxwell took a deep breath, clearly struggling to keep his composure. "You can't just show up here and change the office dynamic." "Why not? It's working." "Working?" he repeated, incredulous. "You've turned the kitchen into a circus." "Turned the kitchen into a place where people feel valued," she corrected. "Maybe that's why you don't recognize it." Maxwell opened his mouth to respond, but Riley was already walking away. "Sorry," she called over her shoulder. "I have to save an intern from a stapler." "What?" "Brian from finance. He's been trying to staple a report for 20 minutes, but the stapler's jammed and he's too shy to ask for help. If I don't step in soon, he's going to have a nervous breakdown." And with that, she disappeared down the hall, leaving Maxwell standing there, trying to process what had just happened. He glanced back into the kitchen where the employees had resumed their conversations, though in slightly quieter tones. The smell of the pastry still lingered in the air, mixed with something he couldn't quite identify at first. After a few seconds, he realized what it was: genuine happiness. Maxwell returned to his office, but he spent the whole morning looking out the window toward the floor below, watching employees who seemed different, lighter, more human. And in the back of his mind, a persistent question kept pounding. When was the last time he had really paid attention to the people who made his company run? The answer bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The following Monday, after what the employees had started calling the pastry rebellion, Maxwell walked into the office with the determination that bordered on obsession. Riley Parker had crossed the line, and he needed to regain control before she turned his company into some kind of corporate summer camp. At 10 a.m., he called her into his office. Riley walked in with her usual ease, carrying a cup of coffee and a notepad as if it were just another routine meeting. "Sit," Maxwell said, pointing to the chair across from his desk. She sat, crossed her legs, and waited, her expression one of innocent curiosity, which he was beginning to deeply mistrust. Maxwell opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Placen. Exactly the kind of information she had used for her smile operation. "And what about it?" "It's confidential." "How did you get it?" Riley leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "Define confidential." "Information restricted to senior management," Maxwell replied, his tone cold enough to chill her coffee. "Oh, 28:04C. So, when Maria tells me she lost her health insurance, or when Tom mentions he no longer has a transportation allowance, That's senior management information. Maxwell's jaw tightened. What employees do in their personal lives is none of your business. Their personal lives? Riley repeated, her voice rising a notch. Mr. Crawford, you cut basic benefits from people who can barely afford rent. That's not personal life. That's survival. These are administrative decisions necessary to keep the company competitive. Competitive? She opened her notepad and checked a few notes. The company made a profit of $23 million last quarter. Do you know how much it would cost to keep the benefits you cut? $300,000 a year. Maxwell stayed silent, surprised by the precision of her numbers. How did you? Basic math? I took the payroll data, calculated the cost of benefits, and compared it with the profit reports. You don't need to be upper management to add 2 and 2. You're not authorized to access payroll data. Riley sighed and closed the notebook. You don't need proof. You incriminate yourself every single day. The silence that followed was unlike any they'd ever shared. It wasn't the awkward silence of the first day, nor the tense silence of their provocations. It was something denser, charged with an electricity that made the air in the room feel heavier. Maxwell looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she had stormed into his life like a hurricane of spilled coffee and sharp comebacks. There was determination in her eyes. Yes, but also something he couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger nor challenge. Was it disappointment? Why? Do you care so much? He asked, his voice lower, more personal than he intended. Riley held his gaze for a long, smoothed her skirt and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. You know the difference. The millionaire who